Human beings are described in the Quran as being vicegerents on the earth. They're stewards of the earth, and we're required to take care of it, including all living things. We're responsible for animals and must treat them ultimately with respect, and they're entrusted to us. So whilst they can, the Quran allows you to use animals perhaps for work, to be beasts of burden, if you like, to travel on the land with them, you can't abuse that. So, for example, the Prophet has said, if you're travelling in a green land with lots of lush food, to go slowly so the animals can feed. But if you're in a barren land, to go quickly through that so that the animals can again go there to feed on better land elsewhere. And the companions of the Prophet, when they rode on their camels in the night, before they would have to unload the saddles and make sure the animals were fed and watered even before prayer. So even before prayer, the animal has to be taken care of and looked after. The Prophet was very keen on telling his companions to make sure that they looked after animals. One day, one of the companions was wiping down his horse very nicely, and they said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, well, the Prophet reprimanded me the day before about the way I care for my horse, so now I'm making sure I look after it." There was a prostitute. The Prophet described her life, and she gave water to a very thirsty dog. It was very hot, and she actually went and got water and gave the dog this water from her shoe. And the Prophet said, all of her sins will be forgiven. And there were some of his companions had took the eggs from a tree, and the mother bird was, really getting very agitated. And the Prophet said, return the eggs to her. You can't agitate the mother. There's so many examples, right the way through to how an animal should be slaughtered. And you might think, well, how's that for animal rights? But Islam is not a vegetarian religion. You're allowed to eat meat, but that has certain requirements. So you must therefore, the ideal is to take an animal, to make sure it's not can see another animal in any way, to give it a meal, to give it a drink, and to then slaughter it. He forbade anybody to hold an animal, to tie it up and use it as target practice. He forbade so many things in relation to how poorly an animal should be treated. It must always be treated with dignity and respect at all times. In industrialised society, where animals are part of the food chain and things are so mass-produced, it's incredibly important to think not just how an animal dies, but how it lived. Organic, free-range meat, which is what you have to search for ultimately to make sure that the animal had the best quality of life. But also in the production of eggs, for example, millions upon millions, 20 million chickens are held in battery farms across this country every year on an area of a cage no bigger than an A4 piece of paper. It can't move its wings, its beak is clipped so it doesn't peck itself. The conditions are so overheated, it increases the size of its comb and its wattles, and it lives a very miserable life until ultimately at aged 18 months they're called spent hens and they're killed for cat food. We keep chickens, make sure that our eggs are ultimately free range, that our eggs are not part of the battery industry. And we also rescue battery hens, so at the stage of 18 months, when they're for industrial purposes, they're considered spent, we carry on getting lovely fresh eggs from them. As editor of Amel, the Muslim Lifestyle magazine, we make sure that we're constantly covering issues that make Muslims realise that they're often part of the problem, but they can be part of the solution in relation to how we treat animals in the modern day. And we want to show how we can bring practical tips and examples to bring alive to the 21st century the Prophet's exhortations about how we should treat animals.